Hey guys, my name is Catherine. Thank you for joining me again for another episode of Missing the Missing. In this episode, number 19, we're going to be talking about Trevaline Evans. To those of you who have joined since the Luke Durbin documentary, hello and welcome to our community. I hope you enjoy it here. And just a very quick update before I get on with the video. It's been a little while since my last one, but that's because I've been very busy. We have volume 1, cases 1 to 10, available on Amazon Kindle now, published. We also have the website fully up and running, which has a number of case profiles, loads of different case resources, useful contact details, links to everything that we discuss in the episodes, and we've also been trying to play catch up on the podcasts. So it's been very busy, but it's all on the right track, so I hope to see you guys there. Trevalyn Davis was born on Monday the 6th of September 1937 in Denbighshire, Wales, into a small, close-knit family. Notably, her name, according to birth records, is spelt Trevaline with an E-N-E rather than I-N-E. She had brothers called Philip and Leonard, and the family lived in the small town of Llangollen, part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Denbighshire, northeastern Wales, where Trevalyn lived for her entire life. The town lies on the River Dee at the edge of the Berwyn Mountains, the Clwydian Range, and the Dee Valley. At last count, it had a population of just 3,658 people, though has a significantly high turnover of tourists annually, mainly centred around international festivals held there in the summer months. As a result, it is known as the place where Wales welcomes the world. Trevalyn, as a young woman of 20, went on to marry her maintenance engineer husband, Thomas Richard Evans, known as Richard, with the wedding being registered in their local Denbighshire in early 1958. On Tuesday, October 10th, 1961, the couple went on to have their only child, a son named Richard Philip, who himself became a police sergeant, marrying and giving his parents 2 grandsons, Owen and Hugh. Trevalyn was described as a loving wife and mother who had a comfortable and idyllic life. She doted on her elderly father and had a job that she loved. She managed an antique store called Attic Antiques on Church Street by the River Dee in town. The family lived on Market Street and, being financially secure, also had a holiday bungalow in nearby Rydlin, about 30 miles or 50 kilometres away on the coast, overlooking the River Clwyd. In the lead up to her disappearance, there wasn't much noted as out of the ordinary. She had visited her brother Leonard's home a week prior to pick up their other brother Philip in order to take him to see a car. Leonard recalled that, quote, "She was quite good, really. She may have been seen in company with a new acquaintance, and she and her husband had travelled to their Rydlin holiday home, where Trevalyn spent a couple of days before returning home to Llangollen on Wednesday the 13th of June with the couple's vehicle. Her husband Richard stayed on in Rydlin to oversee renovations that were ongoing there at the time. At the time of her disappearance, Trevalyn was described as a 52-year-old Caucasian female with short, wavy hair. Unfortunately, there is no description of what she was last seen wearing." Saturday, the 16th of June, 1990, was a sunny day in Llangollen and the town was busy as usual. Trevalyn had driven the family's dark blue Ford Escort estate car towards her place of work, parking at just 30 yards from her shop. Some sources claim she'd parked as much as 200 yards away, but the general consensus appears to be that it was in fact just the 30 yards away. She opened up her Attic Antique store on Church Street as usual at 9:30 a.m. and would customarily remain open until about 4 o'clock. It was typical for friends and neighbours to call in at the shop throughout the day for conversation and catch-ups, and that day was no different. Approximately 25 people, including visitors, friends and acquaintances, called by and noted that Trevalyn appeared to be in high spirits, being her usual relaxed, happy and cheery self, even making plans to go out that evening with some of her friends. The last confirmed friend dropped by to speak with her about 12:30 p.m, and 10 minutes later, at about 12:40, Trevalyn placed a handwritten note on her shop door which read, "Back in 2 minutes," locked up the store and went for her lunch. It is thought that she headed further in towards Llangollen Centre, where she was seen 20 minutes later purchasing some fruit including an apple and a banana from a vendor on the high street, before either crossing Castle Street or crossing towards Castle Street. Notably, one source states that she was heading back towards her shop, though it hasn't been confirmed what direction she was actually heading in, and other sources seem to leave this detail out entirely. It's worth noting also that many sources claim that Trevalyn bought the fruit on High Street before crossing Castle Street, but High Street in Llangollen is an hour and a half's walk or a 15-minute drive away to the south, with Castle Street being just a 3-minute walk west of her workplace back towards her home address on Market Street. Therefore, I personally assume that this comment may have been taken a little bit out of context and is actually that she bought fruit on the High Street, which is what the main thoroughfare of any town or city is known as. In this case, if so, that would likely be Bridge Street instead. All the sources, however, state that she bought the fruit on Castle Street itself, but either way, it's unclear what Trevalyn was doing for the majority of her lunch break, but that 2 minutes lasted a good 2 hours. The last confirmed sighting of Trevalyn was at approximately 2:30 p.m. when she was seen on Market Street near to her home address. Later that evening, her husband Richard called home a few times to speak with her, but there was no answer on the phone. He called friends and neighbours, but nobody had heard from or seen Trevalyn since earlier that day. He asked a neighbour to check her shop in case she'd had an accident, but when the neighbour fed back that the shop was locked with the note still in the door and the Ford Escort still parked in its usual place, Richard became concerned, contacted the police and reported his wife as a missing person. When the investigation commenced, police searched the shop. The sign was still in situ, and the first thing they noticed was a banana peel in the waste bin. This suggested that Trevalyn may have returned back to the store after being seen buying her fruit and had eaten her lunch, though it was unable to be determined how long the peel had been there and if it was indeed the same one that she had been seen purchasing earlier that day. Additionally, her handbag and jacket were left at the store, along with some fruit and flowers, which she had presumably intended to take home with her later that day. It was also reported that her car keys were located in the shop. There didn't appear to be any sign of a robbery, and financial investigation showed that no money had been taken from her bank account. However, it has been reported that a shopkeeper who had seen her when she purchased a pint of milk on that morning noted that she had a large amount of cash in her purse. From speaking with local witnesses, 2 further unconfirmed sightings of Trevalyn surfaced. At approximately 2:35, a woman matching her description was seen walking west down the A5 road alongside the Riverside Park, out of Llangollen and in the direction of Corwin. Then, just over an hour later, at 3:45 p.m, another witness sighted a woman of a similar description walking down Park Avenue. Frustratingly, sources disagree on the direction of travel, with some noting that she was headed towards the River Dee and others stating she was walking away from the river. Another source claims that sightings of Trevalyn were reported looking upset in the passenger seat of a car leaving town, though no specifics are recorded. Trevalyn had also been seen in conversation with an unknown male or males in the lead up to her disappearance. The prior Thursday, that being the day after she had returned from Llangollen, she had been seen conversing with a grey-haired man in her shop. The next day, on Friday, she was seen walking in town with a similarly described male who had been wearing a navy suit and carrying a briefcase. And on the day she disappeared, Saturday, she was seen engaging with a smartly dressed man, potentially wearing a blazer, either in or just outside of her shop, just prior to taking her lunch break. Some sources note that this was a heated discussion, though don't elaborate any further. 2 witnesses, allegedly tourists from Scotland, claim to have seen Trevalyn in local Gale's wine bar with the same male on the night before she disappeared, though no closer acquaintances could confirm the sighting. To date, the man or men have not made themselves known, and their identities have yet to be established. A sketch was drawn up and circulated from witness accounts of the male in the blazer, though no leads were garnered from this. Over 100 police officers originally racked up thousands of hours investigating the case, interviewing occupants and conducting door-to-door inquiries at every house in Llangollen. More than 1,500 tourists were questioned in a 12-mile radius, as we know the town attracted many tourists during the summer months, for the festivals we mentioned earlier on. Nearly 700 cars were checked out and ruled out, along with mine shafts, caves, and rural areas. 330 witness statements were taken, and divers searched the River Dee, the Llangollen Canal, and local waterways to no avail. Police dogs were drafted in, and posters and photographs of Trevalyn were displayed throughout Llangollen and neighbouring villages. Psychics were consulted, with a spiritual medium suggesting that Trevalyn could be found in an area of woodland in the World's End area of Denbighshire, which was searched with no result. A woman on a walk also reported to police that she had an overwhelming feeling that Trevalyn was somewhere near a local canal bank. It too was searched, but despite dogs, no evidence was discovered there either. Family were questioned. Trevalyn's husband Richard put up a £5,000 reward for information in the case, worth at least double by today's standards, though nothing came to light. From the beginning, authorities believed the case to be an incident of abduction and foul play. Interpol conducted international inquiries, with sightings continuing to come in from as far away as London, France, and even Australia, though none were confirmed, and all were assumed to be cases of mistaken identity. All in all, it was one of the biggest investigations in North Wales to date. Over the years, Trevalyn's disappearance was featured twice on the BBC's Crime Watch programme, and there were many local public appeals. On the second anniversary of her disappearance, in 1992, Detective Chief Inspector Colin Edwards of Wrexham Police Criminal Investigation Department, or CID, explained the police's theory, quote, "We believe she must have been lured away, perhaps by someone she knew or thought she knew, and taken out of the area, maybe in a car. We may never know what happened to her, but we do not think she can still be alive." In 1994, a serial killer was arrested for murdering 3 men in Shropshire, 30 miles or 50 kilometres from Llangollen. All of his victims were male, but all over the ages of 50. One was an antiques dealer named Trevor Bradley. This killer would appear on police radar years later. In 1997, Trevalyn was declared legally dead. Tragically, just 2 years later, her only son Richard passed away from a heart attack when he was just 37 years old. In 2001, 11 years after Trevalyn disappeared, the case was reinvestigated with modern forensic technology, with Detective Chief Inspector Alan Jones leading the inquiry, explaining, "We see this as a potential crime, but we still do not have a body. Our task is to look at the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Mrs. Evans and to extend the line of inquiries. We are looking at the information collated during the original investigation and how developments in police methods and new scientific techniques can assist us in gaining further information on the disappearance of Mrs. Evans." In June of that year, her husband Richard, then aged 72, was arrested and questioned in Wrexham Police Station, though he allegedly had a watertight alibi and was later released without charge. The same year, police ruled out the original 1990 artist's sketch of the male in the blazer, citing that it was no longer accurate given the lack of leads it produced. Sadly, in 2009, Trevalyn's brother Philip also passed away without ever knowing what happened to his sister. The following year, on the 20th anniversary of her vanishing, her other brother Leonard offered his theory in the case. He stated that he believed that his sister had been abducted, citing the handbag and keys that had been left in the shop as evidence of Trevalyn's intention to return. This same year, police carried out a further review of the case, and in 2011 considered the possibility of a link to the serial killer responsible for murdering antique dealer Trevor Bradley. Detective Inspector Alan Oldfield said, "We will consider this man and review the information we have," though any connection was discounted in January of 2012. In 2015, a quarter century after her disappearance, Ken Skates, local councillor for Clwyd South and whose constituency office is in Llangollen, appealed for the case to be reopened and for a new Crime Watch appeal to be released. He explained, "A quarter of a century is an incredibly long time, and this is a most unusual case. But of course, it's possible that someone still alive today knows what happened. While it may well prove fruitless, there is a chance, however small, that a fresh appeal on national television could yield key information. Millions of people watch every edition of Crime Watch, and despite the great length of time that has elapsed since Mrs. Evans' disappearance, you just never know. I'm sure Mrs. Evans' surviving family will never lose hope that they might find out what happened to her, and I would urge anyone who has information which could help to contact police. The same year, Richard Evans Sr., Trevalyn's husband, passed away at the age of 83, the last of the Evans' immediate family, leaving just younger brother Leonard to continue the search for his sister. He explained, "I still think about Trevalyn a lot and miss her very much. I am forever hopeful of finding out what happened." In February 2019, two brothers claimed to have overheard information which insinuated that Trevalyn had been murdered and her remains buried in Rhuddlan, specifically under the bar at Rhuddlan Golf Club. Andrew Sutton, former chief auditor for Flintshire Council, and his brother Lee passed the information on to the police, who dug at the site commencing at 11 a.m. on Tuesday the 19th of March, utilising infrared equipment to x-ray the ground. Police confirmed that no such remains were found, with Detective Sergeant Tony Underhill explaining, "We received information suggesting the remains of a body may have been under the floor of Rhuddlan Golf Club. Having investigated these claims, we are satisfied that this is not the case. Our inquiries at this location are now completed. I'd like to thank the club for their cooperation." The siblings later submitted a complaint to the North Wales Police, with Detective Chief Inspector Tim Evans of the Professional Standards Department for North Wales Police confirming that the complaint was being treated seriously. In response to the statement released by Mr. Andy Sutton and Mr. Lee Sutton, "I can confirm that we have received complaints which have been formally recorded," he said. "I am foremost mindful that such serious allegations have the potential to cause anxiety to Mrs. Evans' family, and our officers will continue to support them as necessary." To allay any wider public concern, the identified area was examined by crime scene investigators, but no evidence was identified to corroborate the allegations received. We will, however, refer the matter to the Independent Office for Police Conduct to ensure independent oversight and direction. The force did indeed refer themselves to the IOPC, who decided the complaint should be investigated internally. Following careful assessment, they said, of a referral by North Wales Police about a complaint relating to a missing persons investigation, we have decided the matter is suitable for a local investigation by the force. Although the complaint requires further investigation to consider the veracity of the allegations, we do not consider independent oversight is required. As always in these cases, we need to consider the possibility that Trevalyn left of her own accord. In the interests of flow, this time we'll stray from our usual starting point and discuss the potential for suicide first. Many issues arise with this theory, basically discounting it as much as you can in an unsolved case. We don't know Trevalyn's state of mind at the time, though we do have testimony from friends who saw her that day and said she was cheery and that there didn't appear to be anything wrong. She also made plans to meet with friends later that evening. To go to work as usual appears to be an unusual thing to do if you're intending to end your life, even more so to leave a note claiming that you'll be back in 2 minutes. Why not wait until after work? Why not have committed the act in the days since returning home alone on Wednesday? We can never know the intricacies of somebody's thought pattern or process, but it does seem relatively safe to rule this option out. Police and family appeared to have done so, and no body has been found despite extensive search efforts. Next, there is potential for Trevalyn to have left of her own accord, though rather than to end her life, in an attempt to start a new one. Some people have suggested that the well-dressed male she was seen with in the days leading up to her disappearance was an individual with whom she may have been having an affair. As far as we know, this is simply speculation with no evidential basis. Everybody who knew Trevalyn described her as being happily married. There didn't appear to be any cracks in the relationship, and there were no suggestions of adultery or anything of that nature by anyone. The theory was never condoned by Richard Sr. or Jr., nor by either of Trevalyn's brothers. There doesn't appear to be anything to support this theory whatsoever, with the exception of the unknown male's presence, though this could potentially be explained away by a number of other scenarios. One thing that struck me as peculiar is the fact that flowers were left in her workplace. Trevalyn's birthday wasn't upcoming, there was no anniversary that we know of, albeit we don't know when her mother passed away. There were no special occasions that warranted the receipt of flowers at the time. As far as we know, she hadn't been unwell. Equally, Trevalyn's mother, as we said, was deceased. She had no sisters or daughters, no granddaughters. With the exception of a friend, who could Trevalyn have been purchasing them for? Indeed, it does appear instead, then, far more likely that she had received rather than purchased them. And this does lend the question then, by who? Given that, as we know, there were no female family members outside of her daughter-in-law, could it be possible that they had been a gift from an admirer? A couple of sources do note, though, that the flowers had been gifted by a friend of Trevalyn's that morning, though they don't go into detail on that. Frustratingly, we don't get any more information than that to discern the true context, and therefore potential significance of, the flowers. If an individual intended to leave of their own accord, whilst it may make sense to do so whilst your partner is away, it makes no sense to leave a note advertising your imminent return, which will certainly draw attention and concern once the allotted time has passed. Even if she didn't want to make it look like it was voluntary, surely it would make more sense to allocate a longer period of time than 2 minutes to ensure your safe escape. Maybe half an hour, an hour. Equally, she had made plans to meet with friends that very evening, so her disappearance was going to be noticed straight away. Though we mustn't forget the sightings of Trevalyn over the years and in different locations could support this theory, although none are substantiated at this time. Evolving from this possibility is the potential for Richard, Trevalyn's husband, to have been involved in some way. It has been suggested that his alibi is very convenient. He was allegedly seen by multiple people in Rutland on the day of the disappearance, and that he didn't have the couple's vehicle as Trevalyn had driven back home with it. Though it has been suggested that if he had found evidence of infidelity, potentially he could have arranged for something to have occurred in his absence. Again, though, this theory has not held much water with remaining family members, and despite a brief arrest much later on in the investigation, no evidence was uncovered to suggest that he had any knowledge of Trevalyn's whereabouts or fate. One interesting point to note, however, is the fact that years later, independent witnesses claim to have overheard information suggesting that Trevalyn had been murdered and her remains buried in Rutland. Whilst there was no evidence discovered during the official search, it is interesting that this was the place that her husband was at when she disappeared. It has not been released whether or not other areas in Rutland or nearby Rhyl were searched, including the couple's holiday home, which was undergoing renovation at the time. Moving on from the family, we need to think about whether, if her husband had nothing to do with the disappearance, was somebody else involved. This leads to the theory of foul play, abduction, and possibly murder. Detective Chief Inspector Colin Edwards made the police's opinion quite clear in 1992 when he explained that they believed she must have been lured away, as we've said, by somebody she knew or thought she knew, and they believe the involvement of a car. He acknowledges that we may never know what happened to her, but the police do not believe that she is alive. This theory was echoed by Trevalyn's family, with her younger brother Leonard stating, "I think she was abducted. I don't think that she just left home." And her husband Richard claimed, "I don't believe that she had just gone off and left us without a word." The suggestion that Trevalyn's body had been buried in Rutland also supports this theory, though the brothers who suggested it have been tight-lipped about what information they precisely heard to lead them to that suspicion, preventing further speculation. Trevalyn was not known to have had any enemies, though, and there didn't appear to be anything out of place in her life. She had no known links to criminality, so we need to consider then, if she was abducted, is it likely to have been by somebody she knew, or by a stranger? Her brother Len went on to explain, "She was nobody's fool, so I can't believe she would have found herself in the company of someone she didn't know." So this, along with the unknown individual she was seen in company with in the lead up to her disappearance, seems to suggest that she may have indeed known the kidnapper. In debating this theory, one question keeps coming up. Was Trevalyn abducted from her shop or from elsewhere? We must remember that it was a Saturday afternoon in June. The streets were very busy. It was a sunny day. Over 25 people were confirmed to have seen and engaged with her that morning in her shop. The shop is glass fronted and in a compact area amongst other premises. It would have been a difficult place to carry out a successful abduction. One of the biggest points leading people to believe that she returned to the store after the lunch break was the fact that there was a banana peel in the waste bin in the store, though, as we said, this could not be conclusively confirmed to have been the one that she had been seen purchasing that afternoon. So then, maybe she wasn't abducted, and instead left willingly, at least initially. We know there was an individual who Trevalyn had been seen with in the days leading up to her disappearance. Whilst it is interesting that his identity is still unknown, given how small the town is, I'm not hugely comfortable in theorising that he was a total stranger either, given what we know about Trevalyn, and also based on her brother's comments. It may well be possible that this individual lived relatively nearby, possibly in one of the neighbouring communities, or travelled through the area, and had struck up conversation with Trevalyn, claiming to have antiques to sell to her. This may explain why he was well dressed, giving the impression of a smart businessman, and could potentially explain the briefcase. That is, if the males are one and the same individual. It's certainly interesting that Trevalyn was noted to have had a large amount of cash with her on the day that she disappeared. Could she have arranged to meet with the individual on her lunch break to purchase the antiques? The scenario would be relatively easy to carry out, removing Trevalyn from the area without fuss and likely in a vehicle. On this point, a peculiar and particularly gruesome theory was put forward by a Reddit user. They claim that on striking up a conversation with an antique dealer from Chester, they asked his thoughts on Trevalyn's case. The antique dealer is alleged to have explained that apparently Trevalyn had dealings with a stripper, somebody who would dip wooden furniture in vats of acid to strip off paint and varnish, etc. He said the man was a strange character and that, I'm afraid I fear Trevalyn ended her days in the acid vat. Within the theory of foul play, there are a couple of individuals suspected of having involvement in her disappearance. The first subject we mentioned earlier on. He was arrested in 1994 for the murders of 3 men, all aged over 50, and one of which, Trevor Bradley, was an antiques dealer who was last seen telling his brother that he would be back in 20 minutes, just 30 miles or 50 kilometres from Llangollen. The similarities between the circumstances and victims, despite them being different genders, drew suspicion which the North Wales Police investigated fully. They did, however, rule out any possible connection in 2012, though the question of his suspected involvement still remains in many people's minds. The individual was known to have been a drug user who killed for money to fuel his habit, whereas no money or items appeared to be missing from the shop. It may be, however, that he intended to rob her, but that she had very little with her at the time, or that he made off with the cash that she supposedly had on her at the time. He doesn't fit with the male who was supposedly smartly dressed, however, leaving that avenue open. One source claims that this person allegedly confessed to killing Trevalyn, though I wasn't able to corroborate this information, and he was known to confess to a number of crimes. The bodies of the 3 men he murdered were also very easily discovered. He is detained indefinitely. The second subject was known to have murdered 4 men in 1994 and had significant links to the Denbigh area, supposedly being in Llangollen frequently. His victims were strangers to him, half being aged in their 40s and a further being in his 50s. One of his victims was attacked on the A5 road, where a woman matching Trevalyn's description was thought to have been seen the day she disappeared. It is claimed that he could be responsible for dozens more murders, and it is unusual for a serial killer to only commit their first kill so late in life. He was in his mid-50s when the 4 known victims were located. He managed cinemas in the area and appears to match the description of the well-dressed man seen with Trevalyn in the days prior to her disappearance. He is currently serving a whole life tariff. A minor suggestion is, could Trevalyn have been targeted as a way to get at her son, Richard Jr., who was a police sergeant at the time? Moving on from the grim prospect of foul play, there is a possibility that Trevalyn either had an accident or a medical emergency, which could either have resulted in her death or her inability to return home of her own accord. She could have fallen and hit her head, invoking a fugue state. She could have experienced confusion and got lost. It's unlikely that there was a form of dementia because family didn't notice any symptoms beforehand, but she could have had a stroke or could have fallen to her death in the River Dee or any of the nearby beauty areas. The terrain is unforgivable in places with deep valleys and steep cliffs. But again, her body should have been found by now, especially given the magnitude of the search and length of the investigation. Whilst confusion, a psychotic or mental breakdown, amnesia, or a fugue state could have meant that Trevalyn wandered off on foot in such a small town, and when so busy it's highly likely that she would have been recognised and returned home, or at least to a hospital for medical attention, who would have been well aware of her disappearance. She had no jacket, no handbag, no change of clothes, no vehicle, practically nothing with her that she could have used to move on. There may be a possibility that she is living in a homeless community somewhere, though her ability to travel far would have been severely limited, and the case was well known at the time, with many subsequent follow-ups. Irrespective of theories, there are a number of troubling questions that remain. For example, how do we know that it was indeed Trevalyn who put up the sign? The handwriting did match hers, but it could have been an old sign that she kept for reuse, put up by someone else. With over 25 witnesses engaging with her that morning, why don't we have even a vague description of what she was last seen wearing? What is the significance of the flowers? Why did Trevalyn return early from the Evans holiday home? Who was the smartly dressed male she'd been seen with, and what is his role? Where did the tip regarding her remains being buried in Rudlin come from? Why was she seen to have a large amount of cash in her purse that day? Who were the women seen matching Trevalyn's description after 2 o'clock that afternoon? Why did she leave her handbag at the shop while she went out for lunch? What was she doing near her home address nearly 2 hours later? Why did she drive to work when the walk should only have taken 5 minutes, being just a third of a mile or about 500 or so yards away? What was she doing for the 90 minutes between sightings that day? Sadly, we may never know what happened to Trevalyn on the 16th of June 1990 in Llangollen, Wales, UK. In this section, I'd like to draw your attention to a ray of light I discovered during my research into Trevalyn's case. The true story of Gabriel Nagy, reading from couriermail.com.au. Gabriel called his wife on January 21st, 1987 to say he would be home for lunch. He never arrived, and the following day his burnt-out car was found on the side of the road. That was the last his family would hear from him. Pamela, his wife, made sure the family were always in the phone book in case her husband ever found his way home. But soon they became convinced he was dead. But more than 20 years later, and just 2 weeks before an inquest would have him declared legally dead, Senior Constable Georgia Robinson found a Medicare record in the name of Gabriel Nagy. I'd been living under a pseudonym for a long time, but I'd been having flashes of my proper name. Things were slowly returning, he said. Scarring on the back of his head is a constant reminder of the injury he believes caused his amnesia. And then, in Mackay, he met Pastor Barry Hayhoe, a truck driver turned churchman who saw something in Mr. Nagy that was worth saving. It was the pastor who helped him get a Medicare card in his original name. That record was spotted by Senior Constable Robinson, who picked up the phone and dialed his number. Jennifer, his daughter, said she wanted to tell her story to show others what it means to a family to have answers when someone disappears. She believes her father developed a condition called dissociative fugue, a rare psychiatric disorder that causes memory loss and often leads to people wandering away from their families. I want to give people hope that sometimes good things can happen. Miracles can happen, she said. If you have left home for whatever reason, ring and let somebody know you're okay. It doesn't have to be your family. I'm glad there was a happy ending in this case. It just shows you that there is always hope. It's not all doom and gloom. I wish the family all of the best in the future, and I hope that there are more happy endings like this one. I'd like to leave you now with a repeat of Trevalyn's description and some final words from investigators and family. At the time of her disappearance, Trevalyn was described as a 52-year-old Caucasian female with short, wavy hair. Unfortunately, there is no description of what she was last seen wearing. If seen today, Trevalyn would be 81 years old. It would appear that after all this time, the only way to move forward now will be if somebody comes forward with information. Tragically, almost all of Trevalyn's family have since passed on, not knowing what happened to their loved one. Her husband and son are gone, her parents are gone, her brother is gone. The only remaining family she has who are still able to pursue the truth are her younger brother Leonard, though he is in his late 70s now, her daughter-in-law Anwen, and her grandsons Owen and Hugh. Leonard acknowledges, "It's as much a mystery to me as anyone else. I am the only one left alive from her side of the family, and I would love to find out what happened to her, though the hope of finding out what happened to her is getting a lot slimmer. I realise that after years it's unlikely we'll find out anything, but you have to keep hoping." Despite believing his sister is deceased, he said, "There's a slim possibility she may still be alive. Time moves on and it gets a lot easier, but it's still always in your mind what may have happened to her. I have never given up. I have never lost hope that something will turn up. I still think of Trevalyn a lot and still miss her very much. There's always a chance that someone may have remembered something since. Any help would be an advantage. I understand at the time the police had done all they could, but I would like the investigation to continue. I cannot say you ever come to terms with it. You accept it, but I am forever hopeful of finding out what happened and I won't give up." Local councillor Ken Skates, based in Llangollen, said, "This is a most unusual case, but of course it's possible that someone still alive today knows what happened. While it may well prove fruitless, there is a chance, however small, that a fresh appeal on national television could yield key information. Despite the great length of time that has elapsed since Mrs. Evans' disappearance, you just never know. I'm sure Mrs. Evans' surviving family will never lose hope that they might find out what happened to her, and I would urge anyone who has information which could help to contact police." Detective Chief Inspector Colin Edwards, leading the investigation, reiterates, "It is without doubt the strangest inquiry I have ever been involved with. How a happily married woman could vanish without a trace on a sunny Saturday morning in a town centre is baffling. Although the case is still open at this time, it remains inactive." A spokesperson for North Wales Police said, "We will continue to explore any new leads and utilise advances in technology that may help us resolve this matter and help bring some closure to family and the community. Our determination to solve this case has remained throughout the years, and we would dearly like to bring some closure to her family. Trevalyn was a grandmother, mother, and sister, and both she and her family deserve justice and some degree of closure in this case." Superintendent Steve Gould says, "Investigations such as these are never closed. Unless we establish what exactly has occurred and obtain sufficient evidence against individuals to mount a prosecution, we would ask anyone with information which may assist the investigation to contact North Wales Police. If you have any information relating to the disappearance of Trevaline Evans, please use the contact details in the description box to get it to those who can act on it." So thank you once again for spending some time with me. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you next time. Bye.